Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and I have been talking about COVID and the impact of COVID for years. If you haven't seen me, it's largely because my information has been significantly suppressed. So it always helps if you like and share the information that I am talking about. And today I'm going to be sharing with you an interesting piece of information that has come out of a poll in the United States. I got the idea from a focal point Substack by Dr. Peter McCullough. I always like to credit the people who first saw this. And it got me to thinking, why is it that public health seems to be losing the battle for public trust? Now, they will blame people like me for asking questions, for focusing on inconvenient science. But my job is to look out for patients, and if I see a concern, I will raise it, even if it's inconvenient. But you have to have gotten the science right in the first place. And I think that a big part of the problem is the public is waking up to the fact that the people who told them what to do in the first place may not really have been acting in their best interest. I'm going to share with you a clip from a former UK MP, Andrew Bridgen. And it's important because he was one of the only politicians, certainly in the UK, and one of the few worldwide who was willing to ask challenging questions. In January of 2024, whilst he was still a sitting MP, he forced them to have a discussion about excess deaths. But as fate would have it, within 4 months, he had lost his seat. He was an independent MP, and someone else won the seat. It makes me wonder whether or not the public actually really want to find answers. Is it that they don't care? They don't want to know? Maybe. But let's listen to what he had to say at that time in January of 2024, and I'll show you where the slide is occurring in terms of public opinion.
So who's actually dying now? Well, it's not the old and frail, as it was with COVID. In fact, the deaths from dementia, a key benchmark of elderly deaths, have been in deficit ever since COVID, as we would expect after a period of high mortality. Instead, particularly for cardiovascular deaths, there's been an incessant week-on-week excess mortality for months and months in the young and middle-aged. Every age group's affected, but the 50 to 64-year-old age group has had it worse, and I'll declare an interest. They have been stricken with 12% more deaths than usual in 2022, 13% in 2023, and at least 5 out of 6 of those deaths this year have nothing to do with COVID whatsoever. My constituent, Stephen Miller, was a healthy IT engineer in his 40s. He had 2 doses of AstraZeneca jabs in the summer of 2021 and was ill very shortly afterwards. His side effects were so bad that he lost his job. And in November 2021, he was rushed into hospital, and he now has cardiomyopathy and has ventricular failure with a maximum of 5 years to live, taking him to 2026, unless he has a heart transplant. And when I saw him last, he had a resting heart rate of 145 beats per minute. He subsequently has lost his partner and access to his child and is at risk of losing his house. He now has a diagnosis from Glenfield Hospital in Leicester of vaccine-induced cardiomyopathy. And I will help him to try and get the compensation. But he's just one example of one of my constituents who's probably going to have 30 years of his life stolen off him. His child will lose his father. How is £120,000 of compensation possibly adequate for that?
So we lost an MP who was willing to ask these questions. What can you say? It seems as though it certainly is easier and better to just stay silent. Let whatever happens happen, because nobody will therefore be in any great difficulty by being silent. That was the perspective of much of the leaders in the population, scientific, medical, and political views. But something is changing. I'm going to show you an interesting piece of information in terms of a study or poll that was done. Now, it's not a large poll in the US, but it's just to highlight the point as to how quickly the population changes their view. So this is looking at virus deaths and vaccine deaths demographics. It's a Rasmussen report, and they tend to produce these from time to time just to be able to get a feel as to the political views of the population. And at that time, they only had about 1,000 American adults, and this was in 2023. And they were asking about, are you less concerned about COVID or more concerned? And they're looking at the responses between adults, men, women, different age groups, and they're just getting a sense of the population. What was very interesting is this question here. Has any member of your household died whose death you think may have been caused by side effects of COVID vaccines? 10% of adults said yes, 85% said no, 5% were unsure. The highest concern was in the 18 to 39 age group, where 15% said yes. Very, very interesting statistic. So at that time, in 2023, the population largely held, so it's March 27 to 29, 2023, largely held to the narrative. And at that point, the politicians and so on probably thought, well, no problems here. We can ignore people like Andrew Bridgen. He'll just keep spouting off. Nobody will remember this in another 3 to 4 years' time. Let's move on. Well, here is the problem, is that they repeated this study and they just published it quite recently. And trying to get this thing to work. Yes. So look at this here. So this was published on Thursday, September 11th, 2025. 56% from 10 suspect COVID vaccines cause deaths. So more than half of the same voters in 2023 now think that COVID vaccines may have killed people. And they are backing Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s criticism of government health officials. In the latest report, as I said, 56 found it likely to have been, 32% who believe it is very likely, and I think 42%, I think, backed the fact that he was firing members from the CDC. This is one heck of a turnaround in just 2 years. What happened? I think fundamentally, and this is a principle that works in business as well as it does in politics and public health, if you're going to take a stance, you better be right. And there better be no long-term issues that keep on popping up. As I've mentioned to people, it doesn't take a genius to look around them and think, it feels as though more people are sick and dying than before. And they're not dying of COVID. So what are they dying of? And therefore, it means in 2 years to shift from 10% to 56%. What is it going to be in another 2 years? I would suggest for all those who are in a position of power, should be in a position of responsibility, to reflect carefully on the trajectory of these statistics. If you continue to ignore it, when the population at 76% or 80% in a couple of years believes that, and you are doing nothing about it, similar to what is happening in the US, they will believe that you should be fired from your job. I don't know if I could argue with the public on that point, because the responsibility of health leadership now is not to follow a narrative, is to make sure that they are protecting the health of the population. One thing is for certain. People may criticize me for criticizing them, but there is one criticism that I know there is no good answer for. In the past few years, after we've had the rollout of the vaccines, there was a responsibility to ensure safety through autopsy studies, especially on deaths who were vaccinated. I have been calling for that for years, and we still have no clear publications about this. If there was anything that would be a red flag, it would be this. It is the equivalent of a big company refusing to do an auditor review, where they do an audit, an independent auditor comes in, looks at their books, looks at what's going in, looks at what's going out, looks at the profits, and then after that independent audit, giving it to shareholders. That's the kind of expectation we would have had from political and health leadership. The fact that globally, the only people who have stepped out of that narrative and who are willing to do something are the Japanese. In history, they will be credited for being willing to look at the hard questions because the points were clear. As Andrew Bijan said, it was 12% in the 55 to 64 excess deaths, 13% and 12% in 2022, 13% in 2023. These are red flags, should be investigated. I don't think there's any good excuse that it hasn't been done. I would love to be able to say, listen, they did their best. They really didn't have any option. But 4 years down into the line and not having had it done, I'm sorry. I'm going to be one of those who is criticizing just as much as everyone else. There need to be answers. And I agree with the public on this point. As we said, this is a red flag. 56% now suspect COVID vaccines cause deaths. September 11th, 2025. What will it be in another 2 years? Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure, Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.